everyone, and welcome back. You know how we love to take deep dives into listener questions, and today is no different. We're exploring the experiences of autistic adults, specifically those who identify as non-binary and have gone through religious trauma.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be really insightful, I think. So we're looking at this blog post called Unraveling the Intersections of Adult Autism, Non-Binary Identity, and Religious Trauma Syndrome, a personal journey opinion.
Okay.
It's from the Cheap ABA website. And what's really cool is it's a first-person account.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like we get to step into the author's shoes for a bit and see the world through their eyes. So you ready to jump in?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. One of the first things the author talks about is masking and how so many autistic adults feel this pressure to suppress their natural behaviors just to fit in.
Right. It's like they have to constantly wear this social costume.
Exactly. And I can imagine how exhausting that would be, for anyone really, but especially for autistic individuals who experience the world in a different way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's like running a marathon every day just to exist in a world that wasn't really built for you.
that's a great analogy. The author actually describes feeling like they had to constantly analyze social cues and suppress their stimming behaviors, even force themselves to make eye contact, even though it was painful.
It sounds incredibly draining. This constant process of denying your authentic self.
And it can have long-term consequences too, right?
Definitely. A lot of autistic adults report feeling burnt out, anxious, even depressed from prolonged masking.
That makes sense. But here's what I found really interesting. The author talks about the challenges of masking, but they also emphasize the importance of embracing and celebrating their autistic identity.
That's so empowering.
Right. It's like they've reached this point of saying, this is who I am, and I'm not going to apologize for it anymore.
Yeah, it's a crucial step in self-acceptance, recognizing that being autistic isn't a deficit or something to be ashamed of. It's about acknowledging that neurodiversity is a natural part of the human experience and that different ways of thinking and being are valuable.
I love that. And it ties into another layer of the author's experience as a non-binary person. The author talks about facing a lot of misunderstanding and lack of acceptance from a society that's so fixated on the gender binary.
It's like there's this constant pressure to fit into these predefined boxes
Yeah.
that don't reflect the full spectrum of human gender identity.
Exactly. And for the author who's both autistic and non-binary, it's like navigating multiple layers of societal expectations that don't align with their true self.
Right. They're trying to navigate a world that wasn't really designed for them on two fronts,
Yeah.
both as an autistic person and as someone who identifies outside the gender binary.
It's like constantly being told you need to be different in order to fit in, but also being told that being different is wrong.
Exactly. And that can lead to feelings of isolation, invisibility, even shame. Like you're
Yeah.
constantly being told you're not enough simply because you don't conform to societal norms.
And then on top of that, the author brings in a third layer, religious trauma syndrome, or RTS. The author grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, which can often be a very strict and controlling religious environment.
I can see how that would be incredibly difficult for someone who's already navigating the challenges of being autistic and non-binary.
Right, like you're being told that the core of who you are is somehow flawed or sinful.
And that can be incredibly damaging.
It is. And the author specifically mentions realizing there was a lot of manipulation and control within the organization, which really messed with them emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah, that realization can be incredibly difficult to process. It's like having the foundation of your world shaken.
Yeah.
The things you were taught to believe, the people you trusted are suddenly all called into question.
It must feel like a huge betrayal. And it leads to this really important intersection of identities that the author talks about how their autism and non-binary identity were essentially pathologized within the Jehovah's Witness community.
So pathologized meaning having their identity framed as a disease or disorder.
Exactly. And for the author, their autistic traits, their differences in social interaction, communication, sensory processing were seen as flaws that needed to be corrected.
And their non-binary identity, their sense of gender that didn't fit into the traditional male-female binary, was likely labeled as sinful or deviant.
It's like being told that your very existence is a problem that needs to be fixed.
And those messages, especially coming from authority figures within a trusted community, can have a devastating impact.
For sure. The author talks about how this had lasting effects on their self-esteem, mental health, and sense of belonging.
It's like carrying around this invisible weight, this constant feeling of not being good enough. And for someone who's already navigating the challenges of being autistic and non-binary, it's like adding fuel to the fire.
So it's crucial to understand how these different aspects of identity can intersect and create unique challenges.
Absolutely. And that's why the author's story is so valuable. It sheds light on these often invisible struggles and helps us build empathy and understanding.
For sure. So we've talked about the challenges, but I'm curious to learn more about the author's journey toward healing and empowerment. Did they talk about any specific strategies or turning points that helped them along the way?
They do, and it's actually quite inspiring. We can dive into that next if you'd
I
like.
could see that.
Yeah, so the author talks about how they found a path towards healing despite all the challenges, and it's really inspiring. Yeah.
That's great to hear. So what did that look like for them? What kind of helped them along the way?
Well, one of the biggest turning points they mentioned was recognizing the impact of the religious trauma and actually seeking support to deal with it.
Okay.
They talk about finding a therapist who specialized in RTS and who really helped them process all those difficult experiences and challenge those harmful messages they had internalized.
Makes sense.
Wow.
Having that safe and supportive space to unpack everything must have been so important.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Therapy can be so valuable for anyone who's gone through trauma, but it's especially important for people who are also navigating the complexities of neurodiversity and gender identity.
Right, because it's not just about addressing the trauma in isolation. It's about understanding how it interacts with all these other aspects of a person's identity.
Exactly. The author also talks about the importance of community and connecting with others who understand their experiences.
So finding people who really get it?
Yeah, they specifically mention online groups and forums for autistic adults and for people who've left the Jehovah's Witness community.
That must have been so validating for them to finally feel seen and heard.
Absolutely. Community can be such a powerful source of support and healing. It allows you to share your experiences without judgment, to learn from others who've been there, and to realize you're not alone.
It's like finding your tribe, right? The people who just get you on a deeper level.
Exactly. And I think that's a key part of the author's journey towards empowerment. It's about finding those spaces where you can be your authentic self without fear of judgment.
I like that. So the author also talks about finding liberation and empowerment through acknowledging and working through all these intersections of their identities. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's about recognizing that all these different parts of yourself, your autism, your non-binary identity, your experiences with religious trauma, they're all interconnected. They shape who you are, but they don't define you.
So it's about integrating all those pieces and finding a sense of wholeness.
Exactly. It's about embracing your complexity and seeing those differences as strengths. For the author, this involved learning to challenge those negative messages they'd internalized about being autistic and non-binary and really reframing those experiences through a lens of self-acceptance and pride.
That's amazing. It sounds like a lot of inner work.
It is. It's definitely an ongoing process. But the author's story shows us that it's possible. It's possible to find healing, to embrace who you truly are, and to create a life that feels meaningful even with all the challenges.
It's a powerful story of resilience and self-acceptance. But I'm also wondering about the bigger picture. What can we learn from this about the importance of understanding and acceptance, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole?
That's a great question. I think the author's story calls for more awareness and empathy in society. We need to move beyond these simple understandings of identity and recognize just how complex everyone's experiences really are.
Right. It's not about checking boxes. It's about understanding that every single person's journey is unique and there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Absolutely.
Mm.
We need to create spaces where people feel safe being themselves without worrying about judgment or discrimination. And that starts with education, raising awareness about neurodiversity, gender identity, religious trauma, and how all of these things can intersect.
So fostering a sense of belonging and celebrating the diversity of human experiences.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing that systems of oppression often work together to marginalize certain groups. For instance, an autistic person of color might face discrimination because of both their neurodiversity and their race. Those experiences aren't just additive, they multiply.
So it's like a web of interconnected systems that create these very specific challenges for people navigating multiple layers of marginalization.
Exactly. So creating a truly inclusive and equitable world isn't just about changing individual attitudes. It's about challenging those systems and dismantling the structures that perpetuate inequality.
Wow, there's so much to think about here. It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to create a more just and compassionate world.
For sure. And the author's story is a great starting point for those conversations and that work.
It shows us that even when things are tough, there's always hope for healing, growth, and connection.
And that change is definitely possible when we listen to each other, challenge our own biases, and work together to create a world where everyone can thrive.
It's amazing how much impact just one person's story can have. you know?
It really is.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how important representation is, especially for people who've been marginalized or silenced.
Yeah. Imagine growing up and never seeing anyone who's like you in books or movies or even just in everyday life. It would
Yeah.
make you feel invisible, almost like your story doesn't matter.
Exactly. And for someone who's autistic and non-binary and has experienced religious trauma, finding those positive representations can be even harder.
Right. It's like you're searching for a mirror, but the world keeps telling you you don't belong.
But when you do find those mirrors, those stories that resonate, it's incredibly powerful.
It's like, finally, someone gets me. Someone sees me for who I am, not just for the labels.
And that validation can be life-changing.
Yeah.
It can give you the strength to embrace your identity, to challenge those negative messages, and to fight for change.
It's inspiring, right? It's like seeing someone else do it makes you believe you can too.
Absolutely. And that's why the author's story is so important. It's not just a personal journey. It's a beacon of hope for others facing similar challenges.
It tells you you're not alone, that your experiences are valid, and that there's a place for you in the world.
And that's a message we need to keep spreading. We need more stories like this, more diverse voices sharing their experiences so everyone can feel seen and heard.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking, okay, what can I actually do? How can I help create a more inclusive world?
Well, it starts with small steps.
Yeah.
Educating yourself, challenging your own biases, speaking up when you see injustice.
Recognizing that we all have a part to play in creating a world where everyone can thrive.
And the author's journey is a great roadmap for that work.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds us that change is possible, but it takes all of us working together, listening to each other, and being willing to challenge ourselves.
It's a reminder that our differences are not weaknesses, but strengths to be celebrated.
Absolutely. So let's embrace that richness and complexity and build a world where everyone can truly be themselves.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure. And until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.